There are only 5 ways an industrial economy dies. Most people think collapse looks like empty factories and rusted machines. They're wrong. By the time you see rust, the collapse is already over. The Soviet Union moved through all 5 stages of industrial collapse, and right now, your own economy is already stuck at stage 4. This is the 5 stages of industrial collapse. Why your economy is stuck at stage 4. What happened to Soviet industry was not a tragic accident, not a random crisis. It was the direct, mechanical consequence of a single structural flaw. The soft budget overcapacity trap. A system where factories never die, debt never clears, and capacity keeps expanding long after the math has stopped working. By the late 1970s, Soviet industrial growth had already slowed sharply from its post-war highs. Planners kept building plants, shoveling resources into heavy industry and defense, while store shelves stayed empty. On the surface, the machines still ran. Underneath, the numbers were already rotten. This is not just history. This is the operating code of modern zombie economies, and it proves the pattern is repeating right now in different countries under different flags. To understand the 5 stages, we have to start with the system that perfected them, the Soviet command economy. On paper, it was a miracle of industrial governance. In just a few decades, the USSR transformed from an agrarian backwater into a heavy industrial power. Enormous steel mills, tractor plants, and arms factories appeared at extraordinary speed. Much of the technology was imported, copied, or reverse engineered, but the build-out was real. Investment was heavily concentrated in heavy industry and defense, so-called Group A goods, while consumer goods, Group B, were deliberately sacrificed. The system was designed to prioritize firepower and steel tonnage over household comfort and choice. From the outside, it looked like ruthless efficiency, a state that could drag a society into modern industry by sheer political will. Inside, it was encoding a mathematical flaw. The core mechanism worked like this. First, prices were political, not informational. Without real price signals, planners could not distinguish reliably between valuable production and waste. Shortages and queues weren't random, they were baked into the model. Second, budgets were soft. Major plants were too strategic to fail. If they missed targets, the state supplied more credit, more subsidies, more raw materials. Losses were not punished, they were socialized, buried in the state budget and the banking system. Third, capacity was rewarded, not profitability. Ministries were judged on the tons of steel, the number of machines, the gross output in physical units, not on whether anyone needed them or whether they generated a genuine surplus. Mathematically, this creates a one-way loop. Capacity rises, the maintenance burden rises, real productivity falls, but reported output and investment still look impressive. The illusion can be financed for a while through forced savings, hidden inflation, and creative accounting, until the financing system itself can't carry the weight anymore. That is the soft budget overcapacity trap. And it does not care what you call your system, socialist, capitalist, or mixed. Any regime that refuses to let dead factories die eventually walks into the same wall. Today, we use different words: zombie firms, evergreen loans, too big to fail, but the mechanics are eerily familiar. Companies that cannot cover their interest costs from profits still survive on cheap credit and political protection. They drag down productivity and lock capital into obsolete sectors, just as Soviet plants once did. The labels changed. The governance failure did not. Industrial collapse doesn't begin with decay. It begins as a success story. Stage 1 is forced takeoff. In the late 1920s and 1930s, Stalin's first 5-year plans launched a brutal but effective industrialization drive. Massive investments poured into steel, coal, machinery, and defense. Consumer spending was squeezed. The peasantry was crushed. Grain was exported to pay for machinery and technology. The objective wasn't balance. It wasn't resilience. It was speed and scale. Stage 1 is the phase where industrial output explodes, cities rise, and propaganda writes itself. It looks like policy genius. It feels like a miracle. Underneath, the system is already trading institutional resilience for raw tonnage. Data quality erodes as officials over-report success to hit plan targets. Safety and maintenance are treated as expendable. Governance becomes addicted to one number: headline growth. If your government boasts about world-leading industrial numbers while quietly cutting corners on maintenance, safety, and worker training, you are watching Stage 1 logic in real time.
Stage 2 is structural imbalance, the moment when the trap locks in. Soviet planners entrenched a bias toward heavy industry and defense. Group A goods, steel, machinery, armaments, received priority in capital, materials, and labor. Group B goods, consumer products, were starved. The result was constant shortages and queues on the consumer side, even as heavy industry boasted record outputs. This wasn't just an ideological preference, it was a structural misallocation. Heavy industry produced machines that often went to other heavy industries. The feedback loop became internal: steel for factories that made more steel, tanks for doctrines that required more tanks. Meanwhile, households were systematically undersupplied. By the early 1970s, industrial growth was already slowing, yet the bias persisted. Defense and heavy industry remained politically untouchable. Consumer frustration rose, but the system could not rebalance without admitting that decades of capital allocation had been mathematically wrong. At Stage 2, your industrial strategy is tuned to legacy priorities, not to future demand. Ask yourself, are your country's flagship industries aligned with the next 30 years, or are they relics defended because they are politically sacred? Defense complexes, fossil sectors, legacy automakers, prestige megaprojects. If protection matters more than performance, you're drifting into Stage 2.
Stage 3 is where the numbers lie. By the late 1960s and 1970s, economists tracking Soviet performance saw something ominous. The unexplained part of growth, the productivity residual, turned negative. Productivity wasn't just slowing, it was eroding. Industrial growth rates fell in the late 1970s and early 1980s, especially in sectors that had once driven the miracle. The system was pouring in more capital and getting less and less back. What happened? Disastrous investment decisions accumulated. Once the surplus labor of the countryside was absorbed, each new plant added less output per unit of investment. Capital deepening without real efficiency became a drag, not a driver. Maintenance was quietly postponed. Old equipment stayed in place long past its design life. Repairs were improvised with low-quality parts. On paper, the capacity still existed. In reality, much of it was degraded,
fragile, or effectively dead. An informal or second economy grew in the shadows to fill the gaps that the formal system could no longer reliably supply. The more this second economy expanded, the more official statistics turned into theater rather than diagnosis. Stage 3 is hidden decay. On paper, the system still functions. In practice, systemic failure has already begun. Governance relies on falsified reports. Productivity falls even as investment rises. Policy tools lose traction because the data they rest on is fundamentally corrupted. Look at any modern economy where output growth is modest, debt and investment are high, and productivity growth is flat or negative. Ask a simple question. Is this growth, or is this stage 3 decay dressed up as success?
Now we reach the critical claim. Your economy is stuck at stage 4. Stage 4 is zombie industry and policy paralysis. This is the stage where decision makers know the math is broken and still choose not to act. In the Soviet 1980s, the problem was obvious to insiders. Growth had slowed sharply. Many plants were technically obsolete and would have been unprofitable under any realistic price structure. But closing them would have meant mass unemployment, regional collapse, and political backlash. So they stayed open. They were kept alive by cheap inputs, subsidized energy, directed credit, and creative accounting. Entire regions depended on factories that had no economic case outside the protected system. That is a zombie industrial base. Today, we use the term zombie firms for companies that can't cover their interest costs from current profits, but still survive through continuous lending, subsidies, or special regulatory treatment. These firms drag down overall productivity. They tie up capital and labor that could be reallocated into sectors with a future. In many advanced economies, the share of such firms has risen since the late 1980s, especially under long stretches of low interest rates and crisis-driven bailouts. In large emerging economies, zombie manufacturers slow restructuring and clog the pipeline of creative destruction. Stage 4 is defined by policy paralysis. Regulators know many of these firms are non-viable. Banks know the loans will never be repaid in full. Politicians know that closures would trigger headlines, protests, and electoral risk. Everyone understands the problem. Everyone also understands the immediate cost of solving it. So they all make the same non-decision: extend and pretend. This is where the Soviet Union spent its final decade, and this is where many modern economies are now quietly stuck. If you work in a sector that only exists because of permanent subsidies, if you invest in companies that haven't earned their cost of capital in years, if you live in a town whose main employer hasn't been globally competitive since your parents' generation, you are living inside stage 4. It feels stable. Paychecks still arrive. Plants still hum. Politicians still talk about transition and modernization. But structurally, this is the moment where sovereign risk begins to accelerate. Public debt rises to keep the illusion going. Banks carry more and more bad assets. The political system becomes a hostage of its own past promises.
Stage 5 is sudden deindustrialization and political shock. This is when reality reprices everything at once. For the Soviet Union and its successor states, that moment came in the late 1980s and early 1990s.
Reforms loosened controls without building new, resilient institutions to manage real risk and real failure. When prices were partially liberalized and subsidies cut, vast chunks of the industrial base were exposed as non-viable. Industrial output in many post-Soviet states plunged. Manufacturing's share of GDP and employment collapsed. Entire regions experienced abrupt deindustrialization. Some of this was a long overdue reckoning. Some of it was outright economic trauma. Stage 5 is never just economic, it is political. Regions built around a single industry are hollowed out. Trust in institutions collapses. Radical reforms, economic nationalism, authoritarian retrenchment, or outright state failure become live options. Most countries watching this are not yet in full Stage 5, but many are already showing symptoms. Rapid loss of industrial jobs in specific regions. Rising anger at the system without a clear diagnosis of the underlying governance failure. Public finances stretched to keep legacy sectors alive, no matter the long-term cost. Stage 5 always looks sudden on television. On the spreadsheet, it was visible years earlier.
Let's put the pattern together. Stage 1, you trade institutional resilience for breakneck industrialization. Stage 2, you lock your autonomy into a legacy sector bias that doesn't match long-term demand. Stage 3, productivity stalls, the data is massaged, and the system drifts into systemic failure beneath reassuring headlines. Stage 4, non-viable capacity is kept alive with cheap credit and subsidies. Sovereign risk quietly compounds. Stage 5, the illusion ends and industrial collapse arrives hand in hand with political shock. The Soviet Union walked this path from start to finish. This was not just communism failed or planning doesn't work. It was a governance failure and a design error in institutional resilience. There were no independent statistics that could safely expose the true state of industry. There was no institution with both authority and protection to close bad plants and write down bad debt. There was no political incentive to admit the mathematical flaws of the model while it still looked strong in official reports. Real systemic resilience is not about preventing failure. It is about forcing small failures early so you never face the catastrophic one. That means building institutions that can enforce hard budget constraints. Loss-making firms must either restructure or exit, regardless of their connections. If your institutions cannot kill bad capital, your economy will stay trapped at Stage 4. Look again at the 5 stages. Look at your job, your portfolio, your city. Are you in a system that rewards political connections over real productivity? Is your industrial base drifting on cheap money and nostalgia? Are your leaders promising transition and modernization without ever showing you the actual balance sheet? If any of that sounds familiar, you are not watching a foreign tragedy. You are watching a live replay of the Soviet industrial collapse with different uniforms and better marketing. On Inside the Soviet Economy, we dissect these patterns of systemic failure, not as museum pieces, but as operating manuals for what comes next. If you want to understand how to read the early signs of industrial collapse, how sovereign risk actually accumulates inside policy paralysis, and what real institutional resilience looks like before Stage 5 hits, then subscribe. Not for optimism, for situational awareness. Because industrial collapse is not an event, it's a pattern. And right now, too many economies are learning the hard way what it means to be stuck at Stage 4.